back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today I'm taking a look at the third release for 2018, which is the final episode of the 2018 Fifth Doctor trilogy, and it is of course The Serpent in the Silver Mask, written by David Llewellyn. As I said, this episode is the final of the Fifth Doctor trilogy for this year, including the Fifth Doctor, Adric, Tegan and Nessa, and I'm presuming, or at least predicting, that I think this may be the last adventure with this TARDIS team for a while, because I think that every so often the main range has a little bit of sort of sprucing up, so to speak, so we may have in the other adventures maybe coming next year, maybe some Fifth Doctor and Turlough stories, maybe even some standalone Fifth Doctor ones, or Fifth Doctor with Nessa duo or something like that, because it does feel, in fact, for quite a while now that we've had this sort of TARDIS team together. I think it's been about 3 years or something like that, because one of my first monthly range reviews on this channel was Aquitaine, and that was in fact quite a long time ago. First off, and as always, in the description below, I will leave the link to go buy this release from the Big Finish website. It's currently out now for $14.99 for the physical CD and $12.99 for the download, and of course, as per usual, on the Big Finish website there is also the digital trailer on there as well. As I was saying, this episode is written by David Llewellyn, it's directed by Barnaby Edwards, much like the previous two releases, and the producer of this release is David Richardson, and as per usual we have Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, Janet Fielding as Tegan Dravanka, Sarah Sutton as Nessa, and Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. If you are a fan of the Fifth Doctor stories, then I do definitely recommend checking out my previous two monthly range reviews, which were Ghost Walk and The Kingdom of Lies. Two rather unusual stories. We did have a rather sort of soap opera based one in The Kingdom of Lies, and then Ghost Walk was a very sort of mythical legend kind of story, and I did in fact quite like that one. And The Serpent in the Silver Mask, once again, is one of those stories that I went into literally not even knowing anything about. I didn't even read the bio for this one, and yeah, I was sort of pleasantly surprised about the idea of this story. It took a while to actually get the main premise and sort of aim behind it. However, at the same time, it was just a little bit bizarre. So taking a look at the characters for this release now, starting off with the Doctor himself, we do of course have Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, and once again for this release, he is in fact a rather interesting Doctor, because David Llewellyn has kind of took him in a certain direction where he is very alien. There's certain points throughout the story where you think a human wouldn't act in this way, such as when a murder happens in the very early half of the story, and the Doctor is almost sort of craving something to happen. He craves the excitement, sort of craves the daringness and evilness behind murdering and sort of like crimes and mysteries going on. I think he sort of gets a high almost off things going wrong, and I think that is a rather interesting way to have a Doctor. I think especially to have a Doctor that is so sort of peaceful and loving, such as the Peter Davison Doctor as well, and giving him sort of that quite eerie and sort of twisted sort of feel about them. There wasn't really anything for this one that I can actually say is a standout moment. I don't know what it is for the Fifth Doctor. I just kind of enjoyed the stories that he is in. However, I can't exactly pinpoint a certain moment where I go, this was standout, or sort of this was really impressive or anything like that. I kind of just think that about his Doctor is he delivers a story and that is it. I kind of feel for the Fifth Doctor, I may need a little bit of sort of the back end of his Doctor Who era, kind of like the Caves of Androzani, literally Resurrection of the Daleks, that type of story that has sort of his Doctor maybe pushed to the limits. I kind of feel like I need that, such as in Ghost Walk, for example, where you actually have the Fifth Doctor kind of coming to terms of death and thinking that he's actually going to die, and it kind of pushes this Doctor to a different level. It challenges him, and I think that we do kind of need that, or maybe even a story where we kind of plummet this Doctor into a very dark and eerie situation, which this one is kind of a little bit of a light-hearted one, but a kind of dark one as well, if you think into it quite deeply. You can look at the three companions for this release. We do of course have Tegan, Nessa and Adric, and as per usual, I'm not really going to go into them all in great depth, because with it being three companions, they don't really have too much to do. You kind of have them separated out throughout the story, give them sort of different activities. As per usual, I always like to refer to Nessa as kind of the intelligent one, because she's the one I think that the Doctor looks up to the most, because quite obviously she is very intelligent. She can kind of protect herself because she's from this alien civilization as it is, and she kind of has a much different take on life to say Adric or Tegan, and I think that she is interesting. She definitely can stand on her own 2 feet. She's a strong character and I do like her. Then we have Tegan, which surprisingly for this release, once again, I found her tolerable. I think that she was kind of a little bit of a set-dressing character. She didn't really have many things to do. She found a male in the story and kind of was very sort of talkative with him, as per usual when it comes to Doctor Who stories with Tegan. And we also have Heathrow Airport mentioned in the last 3 minutes. I actually thought we were going to have an adventure where that wasn't going to be mentioned, but hey, it got mentioned in the very end. But yeah, Tegan didn't really have too much to do for the story, and Adric once again is taking up that kind of more studenty Doctor-esque role where the Doctor is kind of his tutor and he needs to sort of teach him, and he kind of wants to get to grips with alien civilizations and technologies and kind of learn from that and see how different things work on different planets. So I do quite like that, because I think that Adric actually is kind of the stereotypical companion. He's the one that does ask all the questions. What's going on now? Where are we going? What should we do? What are we going to do next? What's happening here? He kind of asks all those stereotypical things, so doesn't really need to ask any questions because she kind of already knows the answer already to an extent. However, this story is one of those ones where it's been taken a direction where the Doctor is the main intelligent person in the room. I think in episode 3 we do fully know that the Doctor knows who committed this certain act that I will get onto in a little bit, and he pretty much knows how to close off the story. However, nobody else knows. Nobody knows the conclusion, but the Doctor has sussed it out, so it's kind of that he's the most intelligent person in the room and nobody will kind of get to his level of intelligence. So it is a little bit like the Doctor is the superior person throughout the story, and I do quite like that, especially when you have a TARDIS team like this. You kind of do really need some sort of, this is why I'm important, this is why I'm the best, to kind of make me rise above you all, kind of, especially with this TARDIS team. Also giving a brief mention to some other casting credits for this release, we do have Samuel West as the Mazzini family, literally every member of that family, which I will get onto in a little bit. Then we also have Phil Cornwall as Superintendent Galgo, who is the guy in the Fires of Pompeii. I realised his name, I actually recognised him throughout the whole of the entirety of listening to this episode. I recognised his voice from somewhere, but he's the guy in the Fires of Pompeii that the 10th Doctor leaves the TARDIS with, and then he ends up selling it, and he goes, oh well, I sold it, didn't I? And then he sold it to Pete Capaldi, or whatever he was called in the story. But yeah, it's a rather comedic character. He's been in quite a lot, and he's sort of quite wrinkly, probably about 60 plus, I don't particularly know. But yeah, his exact name, in fact, is Phil Cornwall. You may know him, but yeah, he has a very good, a nice sort of role throughout the story. He's kind of a little bit of a manager type character. And then finally we have Sophie Winkleman for this release as well, who plays Sophia, and that's it. Nobody else for this episode. So yeah, it's a nice sort of tight cast. And at the same time, we also have a robot called Bernard, which I'll get onto in a little bit, but he's quite fun. Now moving on to the scripting and narrative for this story. As I was saying, this episode is written by David Llewellyn, and I do believe the previous story that I in fact reviewed from him was in the 4th Doctor Season 7A box set, which was the Chromarsh Experiment, which in case you've not watched that review, I was saying how experimental that story is, how incredibly different it is, and sort of how it challenges the boundaries of 1970s Doctor Who. This story very much once again does that, however, with 1980s Doctor Who, and I think that this story is very different to all the others, because of other Doctor Who stories, especially the other ones in this trilogy, such as Ghostwalker, Kingdom of Lies, even the ones from last year as well, you kind of feel they all belong to that era, because you've naturally got these characters from 80s Doctor Who, so it does feel like an 80s story. However, this one just changes that up a little bit. This kind of feels like 80s companions, however, in a story that was made for 21st century Doctor Who, which I think every so often it's nice to have that, because what's the point in always having 1980s style Doctor Who stories? Bring in new technology, bring in new ideas, such as in the Chromarsh Experiment, where we almost had that institution, that idea of people gaining therapy, and it was something that very much probably wouldn't have been thought of in the 1970s. However, due to us bringing in a time now where this is of course an actual real thing, it's nice to see that this story once again challenges that. And we have the spaceship that is used that has sort of this entertainment system on. We have karaoke going on. It's a little bit like a cliche hotel, a little bit like, say, Paradise Towers or something like that, but kind of a little bit more consumed and sort of self-contained in this episode. And then we also have this moment where there's like these little babies that were once sort of this main massive toy that everybody used to buy at Christmas, kind of the equivalent of a Furby. And because it's like an entertainment kind of spaceship thing, a lot of the stock has ended up there on reduce. So yeah, there is a moment in this story where Adric is just wandering around, and he pretty much gets attacked and sort of surrounded by a bunch of robotic babies called Chuckles, which I did find rather amusing for this story, especially in the final act of this episode. There's somebody that goes, "There's a baby Chuckles," and then somebody shoots it and it explodes, and then the person leads on with, "And that was a baby Chuckles." It's just quite funny. It's sort of your stereotypical Doctor Who comedy, but at the same time, it somehow actually gets to me and still finds it actually quite funny in my mind. I don't know how. On to the bleakness of this story. Now, this whole episode is basically set around a funeral. So we have somebody who has died, and all of their relatives of the Mazzini family has came to sort of say their condolences and everything like that, and sort of saying, oh, how sad, how lovely they were in real life, you know, like your stereotypical funeral. And then at the very end, we have this moment where they say the will, and then everything gets sort of set out to different people. However, this will is a little bit different, and we just have one person on that list, and absolutely everything from this very rich person is left to them. And it turns out that 10 minutes later, they then end up getting murdered, then somebody else ends up getting murdered. So it's basically a funeral full of assassinations, and people end up getting cut down one by one. And basically, this episode is what if Doctor Who does Scooby-Doo? There's no denying that, because we have literally your Scooby Gang, the Doctor and his three companions, arguably with Bernard being the fourth as also a robotic creature type thing, and it's just a little bit wild. We have all these odd personalities in there, such as the Mazzini family, all played by Samuel West, where you have all of them from different backgrounds. You have kind of the careless teenager, oh I don't care type of character that kind of is a little bit free rein and sort of do what you want dude and all that, a little bit of a hipster kind of person. They have somebody that's very well spoken, once again acted by the same guy, however you can just tell by the accent that he's been brought up in a different manner, and it is just a slightly sort of different personality. And yeah, we have this whole idea of basically people being killed one by one, and the Doctor and the companions need to figure out who has killed the person. It's basically your story of who is the murderer. And yeah, it's quite fun. I think that there's no denying that this is sort of a Doctor Who Scooby-Doo episode. Even at the very end, you have sort of the unmasking of the villain, literally the Serpent in the silver mask, and then we have the Doctor going, so it was you all along. It's just a little bit of fun. It is quite comedic, and I think that this episode is maybe one of those ones that isn't meant to be took seriously, especially with the stuff like Baby Chuckles in there and the karaoke machines, and the way that some of the one-liners work, even sort of the comedy that happens between the Fifth Doctor and Bernard, literally this robot that speaks in bleeps a little bit like R2-D2, but they still have some nice conversations in there, oddly, and the Doctor actually bonds with this robot, and then by the very end, once again, we have a few more deaths in there, and we end up with everybody escaping, along with a few love interests in there as well. So it is a little bit of an odd one, however, at the same time, a little bit of a fun comedic story as well. It's unusual, because when I always review the monthly range, main range stories, I always say that they are more complex, more detail, more depth. There's more problems involved because the running time is 2 hours long. However, this story sort of defies that logic, unlike pretty much the majority of main range episodes that I reviewed so far, because as I've said in this review when I've explained the narrative, we pretty much have one problem. There's a funeral, and then people are getting killed throughout this funeral, and then we need to figure out at the very end who the Serpent in the silver mask is, and then at the very end of the episode, we have problem A solved. And then that's it. It's just one linear plot all the way through. We don't really have many ups and downs in there, unlike the majority of main range stories where we have problem A introduced, problem B sort of comes along halfway through, then problem A gets a little bit of development, then problem B gets a little bit of development, then maybe even problem C comes in by this point. So we kind of have this up and down sort of fluctuation with different ideas, and we think we're getting there, and then something else happens, and then there's a twist in the plot. But this is just a very easy to follow story, and for 2 hours, to be quite honest, I think that this could very easily be cut down into a smaller story. I think that if you're somebody that is used to the Big Finish main range, you will probably end this story thinking, hang on, am I missing something? Was there meant to be more that I kind of thought about throughout the story? But in reality, it's just quite a long one with a rather simple plot at the same time. And I think if you're somebody that is new to Big Finish, then this will definitely be a story that may be worth considering because it is rather simple and easy to follow. However, at the same time, it might be a little bit too easy to follow. I may have expected a few more levels in there because I kind of feel that this story has level 1, this nice story. However, it doesn't go to level 2 and brings in other ideas and experiments that then kind of has the idea of mystery in there, because you just have the idea of who is the murderer, this is the murderer, end of story, and that is it. So maybe it would have been nice, especially if you're a Big Finish experienced listener, you will probably expect more, so it's not a story for absolutely everybody, but at the same time, it's just nice to every so often have an episode that literally completely defies the 2-hour format of the Big Finish main range. It literally goes against every single one that I reviewed so far. It's a nice change. I did all the characters as well. I think that I was very easily engrossed within the story. Of course, I knew who the Mazzini family were, and I knew who Superintendent Galgo was, and sort of what his career was, what his intentions were, and sort of his worries in life. You kind of felt like you got to know the characters, but at the same time got to know the plot as well. And I must admit, with some main range stories, you do need to go back a few tracks and listen to it again just to fully understand it. But with this one, you can pretty much listen to it all the way through and fully understand it. So I do really like that. It's nice to have a simple story, but at the same time, it might have just been nice to see a little bit more added to that script. It might just be me, but the previous episode that I listened to, written by David Llewellyn, was the Cromarsh Experiment, and that episode literally does introduce that plot idea of introducing more problems, and that is only a 1-hour story. However, it still sort of seems to contribute a little bit more, so I guess it would be unfair to give it a comparison to that episode, because that is a pretty good one, to be quite honest, and it's sort of comparing the Lodger to Genesis of the Daleks or something like that. I think it's just one of those ones that, as I say, won't be for everybody. It's a little bit niche, but at the same time, maybe for a new series viewer that is looking forward to sort of getting into classic series Doctor Who, but doesn't want to be too drowned out by a big, massive, complex plot. Overall, that's really it for The Serpent and the Silver Mask, an episode that I pretty much recommend more to the new series viewer as opposed to the classic one, and that in fact brings us to the end of the 2018 Peter Davison trilogy for this year. In the next main range review, I'll be taking a look at another Fifth Doctor story, this time part of sort of a new next series that is going on, which is called The Halifax Rift, written by Scott Handcock. So that does, in fact, look quite interesting, and it's got the guy from The In-Betweeners in, so yeah, that'll be quite fun, and it's in fact directed by Jamie Anderson. Then after that, we go on to a Sixth Doctor trilogy, and I think it is in fact a Sixth Doctor standalone trilogy, so that'll be quite interesting. It's nice to have some more Sixth Doctor stories quite early on in the year, and I do believe we end off this year with a load of Seventh Doctor stuff, so that'll be quite interesting. But yeah, that's really it for this release. Hope you've enjoyed this review. If you have any questions about this episode, then please do leave them in the description below, and I will reply to them at some point in the near future. And I guess I will see you all in another Doctor Who review at some point in the near future. Bye for now.